Tanvi, let's spend a moment on China and what China is likely to see. I mean, India and the United States are seeing what they are. What do you think China is seeing from what's happening in DC?
You know, I suspect they wouldn't like, and they do watch these visits closely, I suspect they wouldn't have liked the fact that even if they're not, you know, mentioned explicitly, you see again in the speech where the Prime Minister to Congress talked about the confrontation and coercion that is being seen in the Indo-Pacific. Hint, hint, the sea he's talking about that wasn't mentioned was China. But he also talked about that very explicitly as the basis for cooperation between the two countries in the Indo-Pacific. China doesn't like to see a US-India relationship that's closed. Some in China have convinced themselves that India is, you know, so strategically autonomous, so interested in non-alignment that it would never, nothing they could do would push India closer to the US. Well, they're realizing that India, when they're concerned about China infringing on India's strategic autonomy in a bigger way, suddenly thinks about the US very differently, and I think you saw that. Other thing that you saw very interestingly, which they will read into it even if it wasn't mentioned explicitly, is the statement in the joint statement about tougher language on pushing back on unilateral actions using force that destabilize the region. They will see that as not just about the border, but Taiwan as well, even though the Taiwan Strait wasn't mentioned. It was tougher language than usual. But I think they'll also be seeing that this entire set of kind of initiatives that you see in the fact sheet, this is essentially about enhancing deterrence, de-risking, and providing alternatives, high-quality alternatives in the region. That is entirely about competition with China for both sides. And so, you know, you see in the Chinese media and the state media as well, constant, you know, denigrating. India will not be able to do this. You know, it's not going to be able to be that subject of, or where the U.S. and the West can diversify. Well, this is the U.S. saying, we think India, even if not now, we're going to build the ecosystems together. And I think that's been missed. This is not about one deal or another. Underlying almost every one of these things is the two countries investing in each other's ecosystems. And in the U.S. case, helping build, India build its ecosystem in certain places like advanced technology development.
Very useful, make no mistake about it. We've spoken so far about how the Biden administration is seeing the India relationship, but we also saw, Michael Kugelman, that there was a lot of interest from top American corporates. At the state dinner where we were last evening, we had, you know, you had the likes of Satya Nadella, Sundar Pichai, which were also of Indian origin, so there's that. But General Atomic, General Dynamics, GE, all these big companies coming, Micron making an announcement of an $850 million investment. Do you see this could accelerate the prospects of India being the destination for the China plus one realignment of global supply chains?
Well, absolutely, India wants to capitalize on this moment with this desire of so many companies to relocate production to India. It has a long way to go on that route. Let's keep in mind the broader context that every trip, pretty much, so far as I know, that Prime Minister Modi has made to the U.S. since he became Prime Minister has involved meetings with corporates. So this is not necessarily new, but certainly that engagement has been intensifying. But indeed, I think that a big part, one of Modi's goals, one of the broader goals of the U.S.-India relationship is to position India to play a bigger role in these diversifying global supply chains, particularly focused on critical and emerging technologies, to try to drive global reliance away from China to some extent. So I think that there's clearly a strategic dimension to this engagement that Modi is having with these corporate CEOs.
What's your sense about the mood in America? Because that's way outside congressional control or even the Biden administration's nudges and pushes. They'll make their own minds if they think it would be profitable to invest in India. Are U.S. corporations at this moment in a let's see how it goes, dip our feet in the Indian water and then build on it? Or do you think they're more and more convinced that India could be the one place, A, because of the domestic market, B, because of geopolitical factors at play, where they should really start now building some roots?
Look, I can't speak for American corporates, but my broader sense is sort of on the one hand, on the other hand. On the one hand, there's certainly an openness to India. There's an enthusiasm about India. This isn't a partisan issue. This isn't just a congressional issue. There's a broader openness and an interest in India that I think we'll see in the private sector as well. On the other hand, there's lots of other places that the United States is looking to invest, and it's really up to India to capitalize on this moment. You know, you opened this conversation with a question about whether this is really a historic meeting, and the answer will be if in a few years from now we can look back and say this was the moment that the United States said yes, and India then moved forward on a variety of cooperative measures and ventures, both state to state and private sector, and really seized that opportunity, the opportunity provided by the conflict with China, and also the opportunity on the defense side provided by questions about Russia as a reliable supplier of Indian equipment, and whether the United States could fill some of those gaps. When we begin to see that, then we'll look back at this moment and say, yeah, that was historic. But that's up to India. A lot of the action will be on the Indian side.
Let's spend a moment on politics, because there's a big election both in India and the US up next year, and American politics are more fractious at this moment than Indian politics, which seems a bit more settled, but of course things can change, and who knows, it's a election, and things happen in elections. But do you think that has any bearing at all? Because if you see President Biden, when he came in, there were concerns that given that Prime Minister Modi had been part of that Howdy Trump mega jamboree, and that Kamala Harris was on the vice presidential ticket, that there may be concerns. He seems to have aced navigating this relationship and building on it, despite being a very different public personality from Prime Minister Modi.
I think, we've seen in the United States, you can't find two candidates that are probably more different than President Trump and President Biden. And yet, President Trump really recreated the Quad. President Biden doubled down on it. The concept of Indo-Pacific has remained throughout. So if you see continuity on policy towards India between, successive presidents that are this different from each other, I have high confidence that whoever is going to be next will maintain that as well. In India, you think of the Modi government and expectations that they've got a pretty good chance at returning to power. If they don't, if they're brought in for a coalition, that's again where the United States needs to make sure that we're constantly engaging a lot of these regional parties that we've seen in times past. I mean, those that have been on the India beat for just 8 or 9 years, they think single-party majority is the norm in India. Those of us that have been doing it a little bit longer realize coalitions are common, and coalition moments have actually been the biggest obstacle sometimes to getting big things done. So even if Modi government comes back but loses a few seats, they're forced into a coalition, it could be a lot of these regional parties that could be king and queen makers on big things happening. So engaging those is going to be important for us to keep in mind as well.